Tonight on Localite with John Compton, Julie Beliel shares the story of her struggle to fight back against cancer. Julie's story is one of heartbreak, hope, and living each day to its fullest. That's all right now on Localite.
So Julie, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you sharing your story. I know you've done a lot of sharing your story, but let's go back to the time where you were working. What was going on in your life before you were diagnosed with cancer, and what your life was like before this onset? And it had to have just been a real, I don't know, line in the sand, just really drawn, a real change.
I call them markers.
Markers.
So it was a marker. My life has always been very full. Pre-cancer diagnosis, I was a single mom with a high school boy who had massive energy, and working probably 60, 70 hours a week for a very aggressive interactive agency in the community, and enjoying what I did. Had a lot of great outdoor accounts, and so work and keeping my son busy and keeping a household going, and a lot of involvement in the community in terms of women's leadership and church activities as well as the youth activities.
So when did you come to the Gorge?
I moved in 2001.
In 2001.
So I had a major life change and looked at smaller communities, smaller towns. My son was longing for private school, but it was not on Mom's budget. So started looking at the rural areas around the city of Portland. And at the time I moved, I was working for an agency in downtown Portland. So I commuted for 7 years.
Wow.
After we moved here.
Oh.
My mom and all my aunts and uncles were born here at Hood River Memorial Hospital.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Really?
And, or at home.
Okay.
And my grandfather homesteaded here.
All right.
In Hood River.
All right. So now that we have a little background on you, you're working 60, 70 hours a week. You've got a teenage son, single mom, and you find out you have cancer. How did you find out? What did that do? What happened in your mind? Where did you go? Like, what was, I mean, I can only imagine being diagnosed with a potentially terminal disease. It just makes your head spin.
Well, so I'm this type A, bull in the china closet, visionary, moving forward, OCD, perfectionist person. Since then, I've lost a lot of that.
Yeah.
So I remember the day very vividly. So on a Friday night, I was doing a breast self-exam, which I did on occasion, probably not as scheduled as I should have, and found a lump. So it's Friday night, it's late, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night in the shower. And
did you give it much thought?
I gave it a little thought, but thought, oh, it's no big deal. But so then over the weekend, I thought, well, maybe I better get it checked out. So I called the doctor's office on Monday, and Tuesday morning at 7:30, because I had a 9 o'clock conference call with a client, I went into the office, and the doctor palpitated and said, I don't like how it feels. I'm going to send you for a mammogram and an ultrasound.
Are you starting to get a little worked up at this point and concerned and sort of like, ooh, maybe there is something
Well,
here?
Yeah, I was a little worked up, but then when they handed me the paper and they said, your appointment's at 1:30 today, and you need to get this taken care of, and then they hand you the paper and it's got all kinds of yellow highlight that says, please call with results immediately. So you take a deep breath.
Yeah.
And, but at the same time, clients are waiting and work is waiting. So
life is still going on.
Life is still going on, and yeah, headed to, went into the office, and you know that you've got this note in your briefcase and you're just trying to be engaged in the busyness of the day, but you know that you've got the note. Were you at a point where you were comfortable maybe confiding in one of your colleagues at work, somebody you were close to or anything at that point, or were you still sort of like, I'm going to be real quiet about this until I know? Well, my desire was to be really quiet about it until I knew, but with a little pressing from my boss, I had to make an explanation as to why I couldn't fulfill a client commitment in the afternoon. So just had to indicate that I had some medical issues and needed to get them taken care of.
You didn't specify what they were at
No,
this
not
point.
at the time. Mm-mm. So a lot of things go through your mind. And most of the time, what goes through my mind is it's all going to be okay. Whatever the outcome is, it's going to be all right. But it's amazing the whirlwind that all of a sudden starts. So if you think about the winds in the gorge, we have many still days. So like today, the river is very smooth. But in an instant, the wind can come and we can have, 30-mile-an-hour sustained winds, which all of our sailors love.
Sure.
But in that split second, your life can change.
Yeah.
So that was that day. In that split second, my life changed because by 5 o'clock that afternoon, I had a diagnosis.
So it was confirmed.
It was confirmed.
And the diagnosis was?
Cancer. They could tell breast
and
cancer. They could tell by the shape of the cell and the tumor that it was cancerous. 99% certain was the call from the radiologist.
So when they say 99% certain that it is cancer?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. As opposed to being benign?
Being a fibroid cyst or fibrous cystic
Wow.
disease.
So that doesn't leave much room for hope that it's not.
No, and the interesting thing is, I spent the afternoon in diagnostic imaging, and we had two diagnostic mammograms and then an ultrasound, and then the radiologist confirmed, and it's now 5:30 in the afternoon, and I'm have needed to be somewhere. I had a community group meeting at my home, and so you just all of a sudden you're numb in a way, but then in another way a lot of things start processing through your mind. And then I was on the way home, and my physician phoned and said, well, it looks like we're fairly certain that it is a cancerous tumor. And I said, I already had that information from the radiologist. So it was silly. I went by myself thinking that it was all going to be okay, not realizing that you could potentially get your results at that moment. It's an unknown world.
Yeah. Well, when we come back from the break, I want to ask you about that after the diagnosis, that very soon after experience, and as you started processing this and realizing, I have cancer, what that did to you and what you chose to do with it. So we'll talk a bit about that when we come back. Be right back.
When we return,
I knew a lot about cancer. My mom died of leukemia, and had navigated as a co-survivor with her. But so at times it's relatively lonely, but I would encourage everyone who has a diagnosis to not try to do this alone.